She crashed her car into a black SUV. A millionaire stepped out and said, "Good, now you are my wife." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to tonight's main story. It was raining hard that night in downtown New York. Neon lights shimmered on the wet asphalt as thunder rumbled somewhere over the East River. Elena gripped the steering wheel of her old silver sedan, her knuckles white. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the storm. Her eyes were heavy from a 12-hour shift at the CAF, and her phone buzzed beside her, another missed call from the hospital. Her mother's condition was getting worse, and the medical bills were piling up faster than she could count tips. A horn blared. Elena gasped and swerved to avoid a taxi. Her tires skidded across the slick road. For a split second, everything froze: the red traffic light, the pounding rain, her reflection in the rearview mirror. Then the impact came. Metal against metal. Her car slammed into a massive black SUV parked near the curb. The airbag exploded in her face, the world turning white and silent. When the smoke cleared, Elena stumbled out into the cold rain, coughing, clutching her chest. The SUV's headlights cut through the downpour like angry eyes. A tall man stepped out, his dark suit soaked, his expression unreadable under the streetlight. He looked expensive, sharp jawline, slicked hair, gold chain glinting beneath his open collar. Even through the chaos, Elena could tell. This man was not someone you could easily apologize to and walk away. "I am so sorry," she stammered, rain dripping down her face. "I did not see. I lost control, please. I will pay for everything, I promise." The man said nothing for a moment. He just studied her, the way one might study a puzzle that suddenly appeared in front of them. Then, with a calmness that felt almost unreal, he spoke. "My name is Dennis Blackwood. Tito." His voice was low, steady, and too controlled for the middle of a car crash. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" Elena's breath caught. She shook her head, trembling. I can call the police. Or insurance." He took a step closer, his shoes splashing in the puddles. "No," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving her. "Insurance will not fix this, but you can." Chew. Lightning flashed behind him, outlining the broad shoulders, the composure of a man used to giving orders and being obeyed. Then he said it, his tone almost casual, but his eyes burning with something dangerous. "Good," he murmured. "Now you are my wife." Elena froze. Rainwater ran down her face, mixing with tears and disbelief. Around them, the city kept moving, sirens in the distance, people hurrying past under umbrellas while her world tilted completely off its axis. She had no idea that this single crash, this one night in the rain, was about to change her life forever. The next morning, the city woke under a pale gray sky. Elena sat on a wooden chair in a small interrogation room inside the downtown police station, her clothes still damp from the storm. Her hands shook as she clutched the paper cup of coffee a kind officer had given her. She could not remember how many times she had already told the story: the red light, the wet road, the crash. Every word sounded smaller each time she said it. The door opened with a sharp metallic click. Two men in black suits entered. One carried a sleek leather briefcase, the other held a folder with the police seal. The taller one looked at her with polite indifference. "Miss Rivera," he said, his voice clipped and calm. "You are free to go. The owner of the vehicle has decided not to press charges." Elena blinked in disbelief. "What, but the car it was?" "Worth about $200,000, the man interrupted. "Yes, we know. But Mr. Blackwood has filed no complaint. He simply asked that you come to his office this afternoon. 3 o'clock. Blackwood Tower." Her mouth went dry. She tried to ask why, but the man had already turned to leave. The sound of the door closing echoed in the small room like a verdict. By 3 o'clock, Elena stood in front of the massive glass tower that scraped the cloudy sky. The Blackwood Holdings logo shimmered in gold above the entrance. People in suits moved briskly through revolving doors while she stood there, shivering in her worn coat. Her reflection in the window looked small, like she did not belong. At the 42nd floor, the elevator doors opened to a silent marble hallway. A woman in a pencil skirt led her into an office larger than her entire apartment. The view of Manhattan stretched behind the man at the desk like a painted backdrop. Dennis Blackwood did not rise when she entered. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. Elena sat, her heart pounding. The rain outside blurred the city into silver streaks. "I wanted to thank you for not pressing charges," she began nervously. "I will find a way to pay for the damage, Dennis looked up. His eyes were dark and steady, the kind that gave nothing away. "You will not pay for it," he said. "You will pay me back in another way." Her breath caught. "I do not understand." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "My father's estate requires me to be married by the end of this quarter. Without a wife, I lose control of the trust and the company falls to my uncle. You, Miss Rivera, have just given me a perfect solution." Elena stared at him, stunned. "You cannot be serious." "I am never not serious," Dennis replied evenly. "It will be a legal marriage. 6 months. In exchange, your debt disappears, and your mother's medical bills will be paid in full." She shook her head. "This is insane." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but it is also practical." He slid a document across the polished desk. "Read it, or do not. Either way, sign it by tomorrow. Otherwise, you will owe me the full amount in court." Elena looked down at the paper. The contract blurred through the tears that filled her eyes. Her mind raced her mother's oxygen tank, the unpaid rent, the job she had already lost after missing another shift. She could barely hear her own voice when she whispered, "Why me?" Dennis studied her for a long moment. "Because you have nothing to lose," he said quietly. Then he stood, walking toward the tall window, the skyline glowing behind him. "Do not be late," he added, his reflection merging with the storm outside. "Tomorrow at noon, the courthouse. Come on." When she stepped back into the rain, Elena felt the weight of the city pressing down on her. Every sound, the car horns, the wind, the hum of the subway below, seemed to whisper the same impossible word. "Wife." She pulled her coat tighter, her steps unsteady on the slick sidewalk. Somewhere behind those golden windows, Dennis Blackwood had already decided her fate. And by tomorrow, whether she wanted it or not, she would be bound to a man she barely knew by law, by necessity, and by a contract that would change everything. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and rain. At noon sharp, Elena walked through the metal detector, clutching the umbrella she could barely afford to replace. Her reflection in the marble floor looked like someone else, a stranger wearing borrowed shoes and trembling hands. The clerk guided her into a small room where Dennis was already waiting, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked sculpted to his frame. He stood when she entered, eyes scanning her face once before turning back to the officiant. "Are you ready, Miss Rivera?" the clerk asked kindly. Elena swallowed hard. "Ready? How could anyone be ready for this?" Dennis handed her a silver pen. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Just sign where I marked." Drew. Her hand shook as she pressed the tip of the pen to paper. The words on the document blurred agreement, non-disclosure clause, termination date. She barely heard the officiant read the vows, or the sound of the rain hitting the courthouse windows. All she could hear was the soft click when the pen dropped from her fingers, sealing her name beside his. "Congratulations," the clerk said, stamping the papers. "You are now legally married." Dennis slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. The gesture was precise, impersonal, almost transactional. He nodded once, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, maybe, or pity, but it was gone before she could name it. Outside, a black car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door, and Elena climbed in beside him. They rode in silence through the rain-soaked streets until the cityscape gave way to wide iron gates and an endless driveway lined with trees. When the mansion came into view, her breath caught. It was massive columns like a museum, windows tall enough to see the sky through them. Inside, marble floors reflected chandeliers the size of cars. Every sound echoed. Every step she took felt like an intrusion. A housekeeper appeared and bowed slightly. "Welcome, Mrs. Blackwood." "La Monsieur." Elena almost laughed. The name felt foreign, like trying on a costume that did not fit. Dennis handed her a folder. "This contains the house rules, schedule, and guest protocols. You will attend 3 public events with me this month. After that, you are free to remain in your quarters." She opened her mouth to ask something, but he was already walking away, his voice drifting over his shoulder. "Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." Lo. Her room was at the end of a long corridor overlooking the gardens. The furniture looked untouched, as if staged for a magazine. A vase of white roses stood on the table, their scent too perfect to be real. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring on her hand. It gleamed softly under the chandelier, both beautiful and heavy. When 7 came, she entered the dining hall that stretched longer than her entire street. Denis sat at the far end of the table, cutting into his meal with quiet precision. The silverware clinked in rhythm with the rain tapping the tall windows. "I trust everything is to your satisfaction," he said without looking up. "It is different," Elena answered carefully. "This place is bigger than my whole neighborhood." He finally glanced at her, eyes sharp but not unkind. "You will get used to it." "Tai." A pause hung between them, filled with the hum of the rain and the ticking of the clock. She wanted to ask why he had chosen her, of all people. She wanted to know if there was any trace of warmth beneath that polished calm. But instead she said softly, "Thank you for helping my mother." Denis set down his fork. "You signed the contract. I keep my promises." Then he stood and left the room, leaving her alone with the echo of his footsteps. Elena stared after him, her heart pounding with confusion and a quiet ache she could not name. Outside, lightning flashed, casting her shadow long across the polished floor. Somewhere deep inside that vast house, she realized, every door she opened might bring her closer to the truth about the man she had just married, or to a life she no longer recognized as her own. The days that followed felt like a strange kind of dream, too quiet, too perfect, too unreal. Every morning, Elena woke up to sunlight spilling through sheer curtains, breakfast trays waiting by the door, and a staff that moved like shadows. Yet for all the luxury, the mansion felt cold, like a museum where everything was beautiful but nothing was alive. One afternoon, a woman named Lila appeared at her door. She was petite, stylish, and efficient, the kind of person who spoke with her eyes more than her words. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to prepare you for the upcoming gala," she said. "You will be representing the company as his wife." Elena blinked. "I do not know how to do that." "That is why I am here," Lila replied with a small smile. "We will start with wardrobe and etiquette training." What followed was a week of transformation. Morning lessons in posture and dining etiquette. Afternoons spent choosing dresses, practicing introductions, memorizing names of executives and donors. In the evenings, Elena watched news segments about Denis, the ruthless, brilliant CEO who had turned a failing firm into an empire. But behind his composed image on screen, she could not help but see the man from that rainy night, standing beside a wrecked SUV, making the strangest proposal a man could make. On the night of the gala, Lila fastened the final clasp of a black silk gown around Elena's neck. The fabric shimmered softly in the light, hugging her figure without revealing too much. When Denis appeared at the door, even his steady expression faltered for a second. "You look adequate," he said simply. Elena managed a small laugh. "High praise from you, I suppose." They arrived at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel under a shower of camera flashes. Photographers shouted Denis's name. Reporters whispered about the mysterious new Mrs. Blackwood. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers blazed like stars. Music floated through the air, elegant and distant. At first, Elena felt everyone's eyes on her the way they measured her dress, her posture, her accent. But as the night went on, she began to breathe again. She smiled, nodded politely, and even spoke with a few guests. For the first time, she did not feel like the poor waitress who had crashed her car. She felt like someone who belonged, even if only for one evening, until Clara Lang appeared, tall, flawless, and dressed in red. Clara glided toward them with a glass of champagne in hand. Her voice carried the kind of sweetness that always hides a blade. "Denis, darling," she purred, "I see you finally found someone brave enough to marry you. Tell me, Mrs. Blackwood, how does it feel to step into shoes 10 sizes too big?" Elena smiled faintly, her pulse quickening. "It feels a little uncomfortable," she said, meeting Clara's gaze, "but I am learning to walk just fine." The air tightened between them. Then Denis's hand came to rest lightly on Elena's back, a small, protective gesture that surprised them both. He leaned close, whispering, "Well played." Later, as the music slowed and the crowd thinned, Denis guided her onto the terrace for some air. The city glittered below them, endless and alive. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said quietly. She turned toward him. "You almost sound proud." "Do not push your luck," he replied, but his tone was softer than before. For a moment, they simply stood there, listening to the hum of the city. Elena caught his reflection in the glass-tired eyes, a lonely silhouette against all that power. Something inside her shifted. He was not just the man who had forced her into this marriage. He was someone who had built walls so high that even he could not see past them anymore. When he finally looked at her, the distance between them felt smaller. "Tomorrow," Denis said, "we will have another event. Get some rest." He turned and left, but Elena remained on the terrace, her hand brushing the cool metal of the railing, her heart caught somewhere between fear and curiosity. For the first time, she wondered if beneath all his control and rules, Denis Blackwood might be hiding a kind of loneliness that matched her own. The following week moved like a blur of schedules, public events, and whispered glances that Elena still could not decipher. Every morning, the staff delivered newspapers that carried their photos Denis in his perfect suit, Elena smiling faintly beside him, the caption reading, "Blackwood's Mysterious Bride." She was learning how to walk through crowds with her chin high, how to smile without showing the nerves beneath her skin. But when the parties ended and the cameras turned away, the mansion sank back into silence. One night, unable to sleep, Elena wandered downstairs. Faint notes of piano music drifted through the dark hallway. The melody was raw and hesitant, like a confession whispered in the dark. She followed it to the music room. Denis was there, seated by the grand piano, his sleeves rolled up, his head bowed. She hesitated at the door. "I did not know you played." He did not look up. "Not very well. It was my mother's piano. She loved this song." His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. Elena stepped closer, the light catching the gold band on her hand. "You miss her," she said softly. He nodded, fingers pausing on the keys. "She was the only person who believed I could be more than what this company made me. When she died, I stopped playing. I suppose I am trying to remember how it felt to be human." Something in his honesty startled her. She sat beside him on the bench, careful not to break the fragile stillness between them. "Then play," she said gently. "For her." He played again, slower this time. The melody filled the room, simple, imperfect, real. Elena closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. For the first time, she saw the man behind the headlines, not the ruthless CEO, but someone who carried too much weight for too long. When the song ended, Denis turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You are not like them," he said quietly. "You do not pretend." "Maybe because I have nothing to protect," she replied. He studied her face for a long moment, then whispered, "That is what makes you dangerous." The air between them changed. She could feel the pull subtle, undeniable. But before either of them could speak, the sound of a phone vibrating shattered the moment. Denis looked at the screen, his jaw tightening. "It is nothing," he said, standing abruptly. "Go get some rest." After he left, Elena remained by the piano, tracing the edge of the keys. She noticed an old photograph resting on the stand Denis as a boy, sitting beside a smiling woman with kind eyes. That night, sleep never came. She lay awake, replaying his words, hearing his music in her head. By morning, something had shifted inside her. She no longer saw her stay in that house as a sentence to endure. It was becoming a mystery she wanted to understand. The following evening, at another charity event, she stood beside Denis under the shimmering chandeliers. The same executives who once doubted her now spoke with polite admiration. When one man made a sly remark about her being a temporary ornament, Denis cut him off sharply. "She is my wife," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Elena glanced at him, surprised. He met her eyes briefly, and for the first time, the connection felt real, unspoken, but undeniable. Later that night, as they drove home, the car moved through a quiet city glowing with rain. Denis broke the silence. "You handled yourself well again," he said. "It seems you are learning faster than expected." She smiled faintly. "You have a good teacher." For a moment, his eyes softened. "Do not mistake discipline for kindness," he warned. "I will not," she replied. But her voice held something warmer than fear. Outside the car window, the rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the glass. Neither of them said another word, but the silence between them was no longer cold, it was alive, filled with questions neither dared to ask yet. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Each morning, Elena stood by the tall windows, watching droplets slide down the glass like tiny rivers tracing their own uncertain paths. Denis had become quieter since the charity event. He still kept his routine early meetings, late dinners, but something in his eyes had changed. The sharpness was softer, the distance smaller. One night, as thunder rolled above the mansion, the power flickered and went out. The hallways fell into darkness, lit only by flashes of lightning. Elena was carrying a candle down the corridor when she heard faint footsteps behind her. She turned, startled. "It is just me," Denis said from the shadows, holding a flashlight. "You should not walk alone during a storm. The generator will take a few minutes." She smiled slightly. "I have survived worse than a blackout." He tilted his head, curious. "You always speak like someone used to fighting through storms." "Maybe because I am," she said quietly. "My life was never easy, but I never let it break me." Denis held her gaze longer than he should have. The candlelight flickered between them, painting his face in gold and shadow. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Regret surviving?" she whispered. "Never." For a long moment neither spoke. The storm outside raged, but inside the mansion there was a strange calm. Denis took a slow breath, and something raw slipped into his voice. "When my father died, I promised I would never let anyone get close again. Everyone wanted something: money, power, a name. I thought solitude would keep me safe." Elena's voice softened. "And has it?" His eyes dropped to the floor. "No, it only made the silence louder." The generator hummed back to life, flooding the corridor with warm light. Yet neither of them moved. Elena reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist, a brief, hesitant touch that said more than any words could. "Denis," she said softly, "you do not have to keep fighting alone." He looked at her hand resting on his sleeve, then back into her eyes. There was a hint of vulnerability there, a man stripped of his armor for just a heartbeat. "Go to bed, Elena," he said finally, his voice low but unsteady. "Before I forget what this contract is supposed to mean." "Hey!" She withdrew her hand, her heart pounding, and nodded. "Good night, Denis." "Good night," he murmured, watching her walk away. Later, lying awake, Elena could still feel the ghost of that moment between them, the closeness, the tension, the unspoken truth that their pretend marriage was no longer pretend. In the following days, their interactions changed. They spoke more easily at breakfast, shared quiet laughter over small things, and sometimes walked together through the gardens at dusk. The distance between them was no longer made of silence, but of caution, each afraid of breaking the fragile peace they had built. But peace never lasted long in the world Denis lived in. One morning, as he left for work, Elena noticed his tone shift back to that cold, professional edge. His phone buzzed nonstop, his eyes distant again. When she asked if something was wrong, he only said, "It is business. Stay out of it." Yet that night, she overheard fragments of a phone call from his study, voices raised, words like shareholder meeting, sabotage, and Clara. Elena's stomach tightened. Whatever storm Denis was facing now, it was not the one outside, it was already inside their walls. And before long, it would pull both of them into its center. The next morning, the mansion felt colder than usual. Denis left early without saying goodbye, his black car disappearing through the gates before Elena could even reach the front steps. She tried to tell herself it was just business, but the tension in his voice the night before lingered in her chest like a warning. By noon, the house staff whispered about reporters waiting outside the gate. Headlines began flooding the internet, photos of Denis at meetings, rumors of corporate betrayal, and one name that kept repeating: Clara Lang, the same woman from the gala, the one with the red dress and sharper words than any blade. Elena's phone buzzed with an anonymous message. "You should see what kind of marriage you are really in." Attached was a link. Against her better judgment, she opened it. On the screen was a set of scanned documents, her marriage contract, signed and stamped, labeled "Temporary Legal Arrangement for Media Protection." Her vision blurred. Someone had leaked the contract. Every secret clause was there: the 6-month term, the payment, the conditions. The media would destroy him for this. A knock startled her. It was Lila, pale and shaking. "Elena, you need to see this." She turned on the television in the living room. Reporters crowded outside the Blackwood Tower. The headline scrolled across the screen: "Fake marriage scandal. Denis Blackwood marries waitress to secure inheritance." Elena's heart dropped. Every word she read felt like a knife. She tried calling Denis, but every call went straight to voicemail. The mansion phones rang non-stop: board members, journalists, angry investors. The staff moved like ghosts, afraid to meet her eyes. That evening, the front doors slammed open. Denis stormed in. His tie loosened, his eyes burning with fury. "Who did you talk to?" he demanded. "What?" Elena stammered, stepping back. "I did not back. Do not lie to me." His voice thundered through the marble hall. Only two people had access to that document, me and you. Tears welled in her eyes. You think I would humiliate myself like this? You think I want the whole world to know our marriage was fake? Denis froze, chest heaving, anger slowly turning into guilt. The silence between them cracked under the weight of his doubt. He turned away, pressing a hand to his forehead. Clara, he muttered bitterly. She did this. Elena took a step closer, her voice trembling. Then go tell them the truth. Tell them I am not part of your games. He looked at her then, his eyes dark and tired. The truth will ruin you too. They will tear you apart. Maybe I deserve that, she said softly, but I will not live as your mistake. She pulled the wedding ring from her finger. It glinted under the chandelier before falling to the floor with a faint metallic sound. For once, Denis, fight for something real, even if it is not me. She turned and walked toward the door, her footsteps echoing through the empty hall. The rain had started again outside, just like the night they met. Denis stood frozen, the sound of the ring rolling across the marble fading into silence. By the time he stepped out onto the porch, Elena was gone, her small figure swallowed by the storm. Denis sank to his knees on the steps, the cold rain washing over him, and whispered into the night, "What have I done?" Inside the house, the world he built with iron control began to crumble. The news would not stop. The board demanded answers. And the woman who had accidentally become his wife had just walked out of his life, taking with her the only thing that had ever felt real. Days passed, and the scandal only grew louder. News channels replayed the same headlines, talk shows mocked their contract marriage, and investors began withdrawing from Blackwood Holdings. Denis barely left his office, sleeping on the leather couch, surrounded by shattered trust and stacks of legal files. The once untouchable CEO had become the face of betrayal. Elena, meanwhile, had returned to her tiny apartment above the old cafe where she once worked. The world outside buzzed with judgment and pity, but she refused to speak to reporters. She focused on her mother's recovery, clinging to the only piece of peace she had left. Yet every time she passed a newspaper stand, Denis's face stared back at her, tired, hollow, and alone. One night, as she closed the curtains, her phone rang. The caller ID read Blackwood Foundation. She hesitated before answering. "Elena Rivera?" a woman's voice asked. "You should turn on Channel 7, right now." Zheng Kao. The television flickered to life. A press conference was underway. Dozens of microphones lined the stage, flashes lighting up the dark suit of Denis Blackwood. He stood tall, but his voice carried the weight of exhaustion. "I owe you all an explanation," he began. "Yes, the marriage started as a legal arrangement. But what the world does not know is what came after." The crowd murmured. Elena froze, heart racing. Denis continued. "I used a woman's desperation for my own advantage. I thought I was solving a business problem. Instead, I met someone who reminded me that kindness still exists in a world obsessed with profit. I do not deserve her forgiveness, but I will not let her name be dragged through this any longer." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "Elena Rivera is not a liar. She is not a social climber. She is the only honest thing that ever happened to me." The room erupted with questions, but Denis ignored them. He stepped away from the podium, walking straight toward the back exit where reporters had no access. His assistant tried to stop him, but he kept moving. Outside, the city lights blurred with rain as he climbed into his car. The next morning, Elena woke to find a single envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a handwritten note. The world can call it fake, but for me, it was the first thing that ever felt real. "Denis, Tao." Beneath the note was her wedding ring, polished and warm from the heat of his hand. Elena held it for a long time before tears filled her eyes. She had told herself she would never forgive him, but hearing his voice break on live television had cracked something open inside her. Later that evening, she found herself walking toward the downtown art center. Inside, a banner hung from the glass walls. "The Art of Elena Rivera." A charitable exhibit, sponsored by the Blackwood Foundation. Her sketches filled the gallery, each one signed and framed. At the center stood Denis, waiting. When she approached, he smiled faintly. This was supposed to be a surprise. Elena whispered, "You remembered my drawings." He nodded. "You reminded me that people, not power, are what make a legacy." And for the first time, there was no pretense, no contract, just truth, standing quietly between them. The gallery was quiet except for the soft hum of the evening rain outside. Elena stood surrounded by her sketches, each one telling fragments of her journey, from the cramped cafe where she used to draw on napkins to the mansion where she had learned what love and pride could cost. The guests had already left, leaving only her and Denis beneath the fading lights. He stepped closer, his usual confidence tempered by humility. "You deserve all of this," he said softly. "The exhibit, the foundation, it is all yours now. I only wanted to help you show the world what I always saw." Elena looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what did you see, Denis?" He met her eyes without hesitation. "Someone brave enough to love me when I had forgotten how to be human." The words hit her harder than she expected. For so long she had carried the pain of their beginning, the shame of being a name on a contract. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. He had broken his silence in front of the world, risked his empire, and chosen honesty over pride. Slowly, she opened her hand. The gold wedding ring he had returned now glimmered in her palm. "Do you still believe in contracts, Denis?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "Only if they are written by the heart." Elena stepped closer, pressing the ring into his hand. "Then maybe we can start over. No conditions, no signatures, just truth." "Local." Denis exhaled, his eyes softening as he slid the ring gently back onto her finger. "Then this time," he said, "it is not a deal. It is a promise." Outside, the rain eased to a quiet drizzle. Through the tall windows, the city glowed gold and silver, the same streets where their story had begun. Denis reached for her hand, and together they walked through the gallery doors, leaving the past behind them. Months later, a small headline appeared in a local newspaper. "From Scandal to Hope. The Blackwood Foundation opens art scholarship for working women." The article showed a picture of them standing side by side, smiles warm, hands intertwined. In the closing frame, Elena's voice echoed in the narration. "Sometimes, the crash that destroys your old life is the same one that steers you toward the right person. Love is not about wealth or power, it is about the courage to begin again." "Aido." The final image faded to black, with the words appearing on screen. "The best mistakes are the ones that lead us home."